Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about things all things media and virtual related, production, thoughts, business models, all of those things are fair game. Our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Occasionally, we come back and kind of take our temperature. How are digital events going? What do they look like? Where do we see them? We're constantly error correcting, looking for what's working and not working, looking for trends. And so we're going to talk about that today. Tomorrow we've got Stream Voodoo. The folks from Stream Voodoo will be on tomorrow. That is it's a specialized tool that I've been testing for quite a while, and there's a lot of really interesting features, and so we're going to talk about what those are, and it's a really interesting product, so stay tuned for that. On Wednesday, we're going to talk about photogrammetry. How do you turn photos into 3D models? So we'll talk about how that actually works. Thursday, we're going to give you an update on Office Hours 2.0, just where we are, how things are going. Friday, we have the folks from Microsoft Teams on. They're going to talk about broadcasting out of Microsoft Teams and all the features they've been adding in to make it a lot easier for us. And then, of course, on Saturday, we have our educators. We don't stream the first 2 hours, but on the third hour, our own Emily Russo will continue to talk about Google Slides and how to get the most out of it. So stay tuned for that. All right. I am now going to hand it off to our host for today, Liberty White.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are on YouTube, we invite you to visit us at officehours.global, where you get a chance to hop into the chat, ask your questions, because this show is driven by you. And let's have a great show and jump into it.
All right. Thank you, Liberty. The first person up on questions today is Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. He says, after Dan Tepfer's presentation, what are your thoughts about achieving ultra-low latency for the purpose of more natural conversation? And he notes Office Hours 2.5 or 3.0 as maybe where that'll debut. That was a fabulous show.
Jeffrey?
There is a lot of work going on in trying to go low latency, and the biggest one, the one thing that I've been watching is the space of MIDI, and taking a MIDI signal, because MIDI, if you take an instrument and you push it through MIDI across far distances, the latency is super low, if anything. And so there are companies out there that are working on ways that they sends a series of packages, small packages that have your voice tones in them, and then they use MIDI to decipher what you're saying and then re-encode it so at the other end of the source. And it's pretty interesting how they can do that. You can get MIDI to vocal music already, and just being able to do that with talking, we could have a really big game changer to have 50, 60 people talk at the same time. We could probably even sing happy birthday without any latency.
Jonas?
I think one important part of that we should not forget is what do we do on good days, and also what happens if the internet has a bad day, where we suddenly see latencies increase. The latency will never be set, especially if we have a global conversation. It might work within the US plus Canada, but as soon as we leave the US and Canada, we'll have a way higher latency. I mean, Grant right now is connected over 250 milliseconds probably. Worst case can be 100 milliseconds in a good case. We would need to start to go over private backbones like AWS or Google's or Cloudflare's backbone to achieve that latency. And then we also would have massive problems with packet drops. It's kind of unbelievable that Zoom can do what they do at that low latency. And even that it works on a bad day. On my type of work, we are always concerned on, does it only work on a good day, on the demo day, or does it also work when everything is on fire? Can you still reliably trust it? Zoom can be on fire and you still hear people and can have a conversation. I think that would be difficult with a lot of systems, and we definitely won't achieve 17 milliseconds from USA to Germany.
Yeah, those worst case scenarios are really important. Mitchell?
I think we're talking perhaps two different applications. One referred to the music, where it's very critical to have the timing correct. I mean, because your ears can perceive such huge differences, particularly when the music is involved and the timing of it. In conversation, it's a little more forgiving. I think our brains sort of work with that well. And the way Zoom is now, it's pretty darn good for conversation, latency and things like that. if you go back a few years to when we didn't have a bunch of years, when we didn't have the internet, conversations that were done on TV were done via satellite, and you could have accumulations of 2 seconds or more of delay. If you're trained for it, you can get pretty good at dealing with that. But I would say that I think we're headed in the right way, not to target a lot of resources at getting super low latency on a conversation. I think it may be throwing too many resources in that direction.
Tobias?
I thought it was interesting how he brought up Dan brought up the specific use case of therapy being a place where the low latency might have a special value. So I'd be interested in what other special use cases besides music that this would apply to and be worth it.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that as we lower that latency, I will say that the conversation feels more and more natural. I've become very sensitive to, every 100 milliseconds makes a difference, and so I do agree that it will be better. And one of the things we're really thinking about is how do we give the panelists who are talking really low latency, and how do we give but increase the latency for the stream, and so people still get a high quality by adding that latency back in. We get better frames, we get better quality audio, we get less breakup. And so how do we have that, but have the and it's the same thing that Dan was talking about, is that you can have very low latency between the artists, but what he's streaming out has just a little bit more latency in there to pull all that back in together. And I think that that's the really interesting, place that I think we could go, where the latency out to the audience could be 5 seconds or 10 seconds. It doesn't really, and I will say that streaming low latency, I think the returns are very low, and for what you're getting. And I think that I think most people would rather see a higher quality version of it with a couple extra seconds to get it there.
Yeah, most definitely. Courtney?
There are several things that contribute to the latency, and it's not only the number of internet hops or the speed of your connection. A lot of it has to do with the resolution of your video if you're sending video. If you're sending audio only or MIDI, yeah, Jeffrey has a good point. MIDI is just a very small text stream, which is just ASCII text, which can go very quickly. It doesn't have to be compressed at all. Whereas video, if you're sending 1080p or, God forbid, 4K, the encoder takes time to compress that 4K down to a packet size, down to a group of pictures that can be transmitted, in time for the next frame. And so everybody on the call would have to have a significant amount of hardware to do the encoding in real time without less than 1 frame of latency. And that gets to be an issue, and not letting Zoom handle all the scaling by what Alex is doing, I think, with Office Hours 2.0, is taking that out of the hands of Zoom and doing it himself on the back end in hardware, which I think will increase or lower the latency, and will afford us a better conversation, since there's only a Zoom connection 1-to-1 between our computer and his computer. It doesn't have to deal with building the whole panel on each person's end.
Good call. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He says, has anyone created, or are they planning to create, a good Zoom waiting room video yet? And if so, what's your approach to it?
David?
Yeah, I did right away. And the people who are coming into my Zoom rooms are people who are wanting to learn about this type of stuff and how to do good events. So I decided to actually put up some suggestions on right now, how can they make their experience here in Zoom a little bit better.
And where does that play? Just as a question, because I saw it down that you shared screen. The workflow for that. The workflow for that. How does that, when you're sending that to them before or in the waiting room, you're saying?
No, so in Zoom, in the last update, Zoom allows you to now upload a video into the waiting room. When you go into your settings and customize waiting room, you can now upload a video. So I just created this in Canva, and then I just uploaded it. There's some music also, but I don't have it playing right now.
Nice. I missed that update. So thank you. Jonas.
I do not, and we don't intend to. One of the issues we run into with that specific feature when they released it the first time is we had so many issues of people no longer being able to join the Zoom meeting at all, being kicked as soon as they join. We see them joining for a second and then they get kicked. We try to disable the waiting room and use a password to protect it, and then lock the meeting as soon as we have all the talents in. because we had so many issues with the waiting room just not being able to permit older phones, older tablets, whatever strange device a talent might be on. We had real big issues getting them in when we enabled the advanced waiting room features.
Got it. Tobias?
Yeah, just maybe David, could you clarify, is it account wide that the video gets pushed to the waiting room, or is it by meeting?
So it's account wide. So if I only have a pro account, I don't have a business account. In my pro account, I uploaded the meeting, I uploaded the video, and then every meeting so far that I've had, that video is in my waiting room.
Sky?
I would assume that you would want people to be informed about what things that are upcoming, maybe quizzes to keep them intrigued and involved. And it feels similar to the concept that you would have at the beginning of a movie theater, in a movie theater. And so that was the, things that are upcoming. But again, I misunderstood the question and how this is being used.
Alex?
Yeah, so I use waiting rooms every day, and I am kind of interested in the idea of having a video that puts that up there. I haven't had time to really dig into it. I will say for events, what we want is a live room, and we want to put live people in it and to talk to the audience and to have them interact with them and warm them up and make sure that their video is working, and it makes such a huge difference. Like, we invite people in and give them a reason to come half an hour early, even for this show. Like, we do it for an hour. People are hanging out and talking and working out things and so on and so forth. But even for other events where we have 500 people come in, we want to bring them in and talk to them and warm them up so that they're really ready to go. And that's stealing that directly from like David Letterman. Not everybody just walks in, sits down and watches David Letterman. You stand in line and then you sit down, and for 45 minutes you watch him put it together, and another comic comes out, and then David Letterman comes out, and then there's a whole bunch of things, and so that the audience is really ready for the show. So that's what we think about a lot for waiting rooms. But I think that having a general one is pretty good. I use it for everything. I don't use passwords or anything. Like, for all my meetings, I use waiting rooms because I can just bring them in really quickly and they don't have to have a password.
Okay, Blue?
Yeah, I'm with Jonas and a little bit with Alex on this one. We tend not to use waiting rooms, mostly because when we're bringing people into our events, we're bringing them through a membership site that essentially prevents them from even getting into Zoom if we're not ready for them to be in Zoom. So we create essentially a fully branded waiting room, independent of Zoom entirely, that we can put whatever we want on it. So it's a lot more flexible and a lot, basically allows us to make it a lot, just more branded to the event, essentially. So typically features like this from Zoom don't really excite me all that much.
Got it. Next question.
Next one comes from our friend Alex Forty-Goldner in London in the UK. And Alex says, yesterday, the Beatles' Get Back, the Rooftop Concert, was an hour-long live streaming event across multiple IMAX streams in the US and the UK. The Hollywood Reporter says it played to near-sellout crowds. What does this mean?
Courtney.
Means they should have advertised it better, or they would have sold it out. It also means I'm not sure how well something like this would work if it's a live. Obviously, this wasn't live because, some of those people aren't living anymore. It was a play out. Maybe they played it out at the same time. I'm not sure, since I didn't see it, whether it was all done at the same time universally across the globe. That is the issue, is that you're in different time zones. And if you're doing something as a live event, it would all have to go out at one time, which means some people would be in the middle of the night. It also means that they should have, there's a lease available on the Sonorama Dome, has a nice IMAX screen in it. Nobody leased it.
Alex?
I'm pretty sure it was live. Anyway, almost positive. The excitement around that, it wasn't with the Beatles. It was with, I think it was with Peter Jackson. So, talking about the making of it. And anyway, so the power of that is you get the energy of people coming into a venue. So beyond IMAX, just venue to venue, I think is super exciting. Of being able to take, and have 15,000 or 10,000 or 12,000 people or 100,000 people be able to experience something. We're going to see these kind of events, I think, get much bigger. And you can imagine being able to have, how do you powerfully manage an event for hundreds of thousands of people at the same time. And there are challenges that Courtney talked about, time zones and everything else, and that people have to come in a lot of different ways. And so that is a challenge. But I think that you can still do a morning event in the West Coast that ends up in the evening in the all over. So I think that it's a pretty interesting thing to have people feel like, really that they were there for that conversation. And I believe they also took questions, from all the theaters. So it's a pretty slick setup.
Yeah, robust and interactive. Craig?
I was just going to add that, it's somewhat of a testament to the ongoing interest that the general public has with the Beatles and with stuff that was created 50 years ago now. And
Definitely.
Trying to find that sort of, interest in stuff that's going on newer is harder and harder for a number of reasons.
Bill?
Yeah, I'm gonna follow along with Craig saying. For me, the thing is, this is a unique thing. The Beatles were the first global act that crossed, I think, generations the way they did. You had rock stars, you had Elvis, and you had a whole bunch of people beforehand, but the Beatles really touched so many demographics and psychographics and different kinds of people, from the teenagers who were nuts about their first things and the older folks didn't get it, all the way through their highly creative period where in the film, you'll see them talking to somebody who's 50 years old on the street, and they have as much resonance with those artistic works as did the 12-year-olds and 15-year-olds. That's pretty rare. So I just think to be able to see creativity at that level and watch those moments where the things we all know and love came into being and watch the creative process happen is just so universal that it's very unusual. And then to have had that material and to have had really high quality people like Peter Jackson apply their art to making sure that it remains interesting, even though it's tremendous amounts of content. I think it was a magical thing. I don't think we're going to see the likes of that again very soon. I think it was just a moment in time captured beautifully.
Next question.
Next one comes from TJ Asher. He says, several panelists, Josh K., Fenwick, David B., to name a few, have the ability to share video into Zoom. How are they accomplishing this feat?
Chris?
So I use OBS. I really like it, and I use OBS with the Stream Deck. So for example, the nice thing about it is I can pick a screen. So there's a screen, but I can also pick a window. So there's a window, that's a Keynote window. And if I make Keynote the live app, I can step through it. There's Nigel punching my tooth out the other night. OBS makes it super easy to do that. I can pick a QuickTime movie. I can hit play. I can also, if you want to, you can load the video into OBS, but I firmly believe that OBS just starts to, you don't want to ask it to do too much. Taking a window, fine. Taking a screen, fine. Loading a bunch of videos into it, I wouldn't bother doing that.
Yes, saying that from experience. David?
So I'm taking a couple different approaches here. I use Ecamm on a Mac, and I've got my streaming computer here and a content computer here, and the content computer is coming into the streaming computer using just an Elgato 4K cam link. And that's so that I can have that on the screen at the same time as any of the cameras that are in my Atem Mini. So then what that allows me to do is to build a scene like this and have audio playing at the same time. The audio is routed through a Focusrite Scarlett out of this first computer into the Flow 8, which is then feeding into my streaming computer.
Nice setup. Charles?
Yeah, so mine is basically mostly coming from Resolve. Now, that isn't a separate machine that is not attached to the internet at all. And if I just need to, let's say, if the client can't get access to my streaming, we could do it on Zoom, and I can show them, let's say, like where things are, if we're doing retouches or anything, just to get an idea of where we're with the footage, what can we do, just as a quick set, just working together to see where we can head. And then once I share all the high-res files, they could see it on their proper screens, since Zoom does a little gamma shifting at the bottom end.
Jeffrey?
So yeah, I do I use Wirecast, but you can use vMix and OBS, of course, as Chris said. But the other thing is you can also use NDI and bringing that in, especially if you got it on another computer. So one of my shows, I have everything on this secondary computer for all screens that I'm going to show, and then I bring it into my my streaming software, whatever you want to use, and then of course that can show into Zoom. However, what you can also do is you can go down to that little video tab on the bottom corner and switch between your regular video and then the NDI video if you had once you have NDI tools installed on the computers, and be able to switch it back and forth that way as well.
And Bill?
And I'm intrigued. Alex was talking about live video in Keynote. And for me, running Keynote on an iPad Pro separately and bringing that into the Atem switcher means that since live video is now a possibility, that's going to be an easy way to both trigger and run content from something that I can control or from a camera. I'm pretty excited about that. Haven't done it yet just because we've been working on other kinds of things, but I'm looking forward to being able to just punch a button and have Keynote come up and have video embedded in that come up. Should be nice.
Yeah, so many different ways to make it happen. Next question.
Next one comes from our friend Doug Ferguson here on the panel. Often, when do you think Zoom webinars will get breakout rooms?
Grant?
I'm very confident that it's going to be sometime in the future. It's not actually that they're very funny, Zoom, about when they make announcements that they do take their time. But I did hear early on that when they built meetings and Zoom and webinars, sorry, they created them on two totally different stacks. And so then when it happened for breakout rooms and they built all these breakout rooms, it was built in meetings only. And it wasn't something that I could just copy and paste it into webinar, because webinar had moved on into a whole nother development stream. And so it makes it very difficult they've actually got to totally re-engineer it to make it work into webinar. So I think that's what's taking the time. And I think they're also thinking about the user experience of that as well. So it will be good, although I don't like webinar that much, but it'll help a little bit.
Sometime in the future, right? Jonas?
I don't think they will ever add it. And here's why. Because both of those features are on different stacks, and they both don't seem to be really well engineered. They both seem to be something that was tagged onto something. If you dig in the API, you actually find a lot out about the breakout rooms. And one of the things that I think we'll see is Zoom events. We'll get a feature where out of a webinar you can join another meeting, and that will how they give us breakout rooms in webinars. There will never be breakout rooms in webinars.
Time will tell. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, have you ever used keystone patch panels when building racks? The thought of combining Ethernet and quarter-inch audio in one panel sounds very appealing ergonomically, but I'm wondering if there'd be any audio interference issues.
Courtney?
I'd only be careful about using low impedance microphone inputs on the same patch panel, because line level signals, Ethernet is usually carried through twisted pair, and so that tends to cancel out most EMI issues that are coming out of a digital switch signal. And you can put them on a shared panel. I would just make sure that you don't bundle the cables together on the way out, and just keep the cables bundled separately and on opposite sides of the cabinet, and you should be fine.
Noah?
Yeah, I do use some Keystone for my setup, and I'll show that now. So I use this in my fly kits, and so I use it for both audio. Well, actually more so for video, but specifically around the audio question. Yeah, if you're using quarter inch, that's going to probably be unprotected. So I actually go to XLR, which is not the Keystone that you see at the bottom. It's a different Neutrik patch at the top, because you have balanced instead of unbalanced. But I wanted to just show that specifically I use it for HDMIs, which are great, SDIs, and then we also have USB-C and USB 3 as well. So it's a pretty versatile system, and it can host a lot of different components, and they're they can pop in and out if one of those connectors goes out. So instead of wearing out your hardware, you can switch out those keystones if you need to. So pretty cool unit.
Grant?
Yeah, I've done exactly the same thing. The monoprice ones are super cheap, and you can get. I use them for HDMI. It's really good, and then I've used it for Ethernet as well. It was really handy to do WAN input and then a couple of Ethernet outputs. And they're all just pass through. So it's super easy. And the cool thing about them too is that then they double up as barrels. So there's been times where I've desperately needed to join something, and I'll just snap one of those out and then run it and plug it in between two cables. It's been super handy. And the other one I've used is a little 3.5 eighth inch for headphones. It's really handy for that. You can just plug headphones straight into whatever equipment's in the rack.
Neat. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think convenience panels in general are super important. And because it just, when you're in a location, someone trips over a wire, you do not want that connected to your expensive equipment. So, and in our smaller kits, now our largest kits, one whole case is all just video, another case is all just audio. So we don't have to split them up as much. But we generally want to try to go through something so that if something catastrophic happens to the cables, or just focus on breaking down, that we don't want them to break down our kit. So anyway, they're really useful. And what's nice about them is by having them be modular, if something breaks or if you want to change it, you can just swap it out rather than buying ones that are dedicated to SDI that are all pre-built in there. That's nice. And if we know we're going to do that, that's fine. But it's nice to be able to replace them and move them around.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Doug Ferguson in Indianapolis, and here on the panel had a problem with Zoom ISO. Where one particular panelist did not matter what we did, it would not show video when we pinned him to a source. Any thoughts on how to fix this?
Jeffrey?
So with Zoom ISO, I've seen not that, but I've seen it where the video is kind of shifted, so it's so you only see half of the video. I try, if I have problems with the video and it's going through ISO, then I make sure that I hook up my something like my my Atem Mini Pro, and then see if I can get the hard wire to see that video. But if that's still not seeing the video, and you're in on the screen and you're looking at the person's screen and you see absolutely nothing there, then you might want to start looking at their computer and their web camera and see what what the statistics say that they're coming in resolution wise, because maybe there's some weird resolution or something like that. It's the Zoom's just not accepting. But that's the only thing I can think of is get back to the hardware, if anything. But I need to know more about your system before I could continue to deduce.
Alex?
Yeah, I'd also be interested to see what the far end system was. Is it a mobile phone? Is it a PC? Is it a Mac? Is it those types of things are important to us, as well as their bandwidth. Are they stopping and starting a lot? Especially if you have a system that everything else is working for everybody else. And if you put somebody else in there, it works fine. And it's just that person, then I really want to know everything about that person's setup.
Courtney?
Yeah, the universal solution is the MDHX from Decimator, which will, a lot of the times it's a aspect ratio or resolution or frame rate issue interlaced versus progressive segmented frame versus regular progressive. Those kind of issues can cause the encoder to shut down. The other thing is HDCP. Make sure that whatever they're using as a computer, whatever you're using as a computer to bring them in or pin, doesn't have somehow gotten the copyright bit turned on, and some switchers will just shut off inputs if HDCP is enabled. So make sure that there's no HDCP turned on.
Yeah, it didn't look. I mean, everybody else on the panel was coming in the same way. This guy was a laptop, and it was just very strange that this one guy, no matter what we did, couldn't get him in. I finally had to pin him to a second screen, capture that computer, bring it into the TriCaster. But
did you try running him through an MDHX?
No. I just grabbed the screen from a different computer, but it was like, hey, we have the Zoom ISO. Everybody else is going through Zoom ISO, great, but not this one guy. No matter what we did for the 2-hour meeting, it was frustrating.
Maybe Jonas has the answer. Jonas?
How did you pin him? Did you pin him by ID or name?
I think it was by the name.
So what I would have tried is go into the Zoom meeting and rename him to something simple. Because what I could see happening is that on the way to reporting the name, there might be some characters that get taken out. So when you try to pin them, actually you have an issue there. I had the issue when we have panelists either like typing in the same name and adding a space at the end, or a character that's not visible in the UTF spec that then gets abducted by the interface. But then if you try to pin them, you can't do it.
Jeffrey.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Also, look in the drop down and see if that name shows up more than one time, because especially since doing it in after hours, I notice that if people drop out and come back in, those names just stay right there. So make sure that that you've got the correct person's name on the drop down list.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Jonas Iser in it looks like Karlsruhe, Germany. How do you store your cables and bring them on site on a rather small production?
Alex.
So there's a difference between storing them and bringing them on site. So it depends on for storing them, anything under 3 feet, we usually hang them because then they don't start building up memory, and it's just easier to grab them so that you can get these little slots that you just put on the wall or on sides of your cases or whatever, and then you just hang them by their connectors, and they just all stay nice and clean. And then if anything longer than that, we start to cable them. I keep on meaning to bring a cable out so I can show this, but one of the things that we do we used to do for all of our cables when I had a whole warehouse full of these, we put our logo right next to the cable and then another logo further down. And when you match them together, it ensures that all the cables are exactly the same diameter, so that all the 15s fit inside of the 25s and the 10s fit inside of the 15s. And you can make cases that are very heavy. So because they're just all copper, and then we would pack them into either 1650s. A lot of times for very small kits, like ones that we personally go with, I use Eagle Creek cubes and put the different cables into that. That's our tiny build. Then it's 1650s, and then it's road cases. Road cases full of them with sections. The coolest road case, I took a picture of it because it was so cool, is this one. This is from a German company called Ambien, but they were in Italy with us, and this road case, I took a picture because it was so cool. Those separators, there's like a whole bunch of things. So they can make the separators wider and shorter. They have a color code for all the cables. They have, and then they have this drawing area on the inside of the case that they can draw like this. These are 100 foot. This is 50. You're not 100 foot, but 100 meter. This is 30 meter, 20 meter. It was just great German engineering. Like it was just so well thought out. And so anyway, so I've never built one like that, but I've wanted to because it was so cool.
Noah.
That's so fun. I love geeking out about this kind of stuff. For me, on the smallest productions, I use mesh bags, makeup bags. I think we've talked about that on the show before. But more specifically, details. I use Velcro ties on every single cable. Everything has to be over. I know with some electricians, they actually like to straight coil their power cables, but because in my kit, I get to choose what I want to do. I tend to also over those power cables as well. So, and then if I move up to kind of my medium-sized kit, I guess you can call it, because depending on how large your production is, you can get crazy. I use milk crates. So on the third tier of my cart here, the bottom tier, you can see SDI cables is in this milk crate, and so it depends on which one it is. I haven't taken Alex's nested setup yet, but I'll just do over the size of the milk crate so it fits perfectly in there. And then those mesh bags that we mentioned earlier will probably go in my custom cases that I have up here. So it really just depends on the cable and how big the production is and what we bring.
Jonas.
Similar to Noah, I have everything in little bags. And then I have from Douchebag, it's a really nice backpack that has just one big compartment. So I can fit all the cables, all my gear in there. And on location, I put that on a table, I open it up, and I have access to all my cables that are sorted, that are color-coded, a logo on the front and back of the cable, and then cable ties.
Grant.
Yeah, I'm interested in the smaller productions, because I'm in an interesting spot where I could continue to build up my kit, although I don't want to go on site, so I just want to do it from here. But the point that I've found is that a partnership with a production company makes such a big difference. And so now I find that those medium jobs that I may have been able to pull everything apart and do, I can now go to that partnership with that production company, and they're going to give me road cases full of stuff, drawers full of every adapter I need and every tape I need and all the tools I need. And they're going to deliver it for me, and they're going to set it up for me, and I'm going to come and run the show because that's what I do best. And then they're going to come and pack it down, and they're going to take it away. And I did a funeral recently just exactly like that, and it was perfect. I had everything I needed, and all exactly the picture that Alex showed is exactly what I had. And they have cable kits and AV kits, and there's just every drawer you can think of and every adapter you need, and all of those things were just kind of included in the, hey, I've got $3,000 for this job, can you do it? Yeah. And they just do it. And so
Nice.
it's really worth having that connection with a production company.
Collaboration. We'll have that as a second hour soon. Courtney?
Yeah, on big productions, I agree. It's better to have cable cases. Unfortunately, cable cases, as Alex mentioned, get to be heavy, and you have to have lift gates on all trucks to get them in and out. And they're far heavier than any one person could ever lift. So on small productions where you have to travel with your own equipment for an individual operator or so on, I always use a separate gym bag like this to organize things. It's ripstop nylon. They have pouches on either side, so you can keep adapters and smaller items in those pouches and put the cables in the middle, and they're all wrapped. And I lay them in one direction with a tie, like a Velcro tie that holds them together on one side, and then the next cable on top horizontally with a Velcro tie on the other side. So they're ping-ponged like that. So when you pull them out, you grab left side, right side, left side, right side. That keeps them from becoming intertwined or the Velcro from sticking from one cable to another as you load them into the bag. The other important thing is in a bag like that, it's flexible. It's small enough that one person can lift it, because a lot of times these bags are being put into people's cars and they have to go in behind seats and things like that. So it's easy to squish them down and manipulate them around, whereas a case would be unforgiving if you can't get the back end of your hatchback closed.
Right. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Ryan Jordan in Columbus, Ohio. He says, during yesterday's AFC Championship game, the national anthem singer's mic cut out and a portable speaker array was placed directly behind the CBS on-field desk. How do you make sure these things don't happen during your shows?
Oh, this is a great question. Has anyone had that happen? All right, Blue.
I don't actually have a solution for it by any stretch of the imagination. I see Alex is next up, so I'm sure he will. What did give me a little bit of joy, however, is the fact that this happened. Because for those of us in live production, when the client comes to you and says, how did that mic turn off? Or how did this happen? I get to point at things like this, or when the Oscar music mix is just atrocious, and say, listen, sometimes that happens with live production, even when you have millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars at your disposal.
Yeah, it just makes it real so that we can show them we're not all super people. Yeah. Alex?
Yeah, I have to admit that fortunately I wasn't on the team that did the Apple event that no one wants to talk about, the infamous Apple event. But that I got to add so many things to events, because all I had to say for years was, well, we don't want it to turn out like the Apple event. I mean, that's when you have all the money in the world. To Blue's point, I mean, I used that for years. It finally wore out because no one remembers it anymore. But those of us in live streaming were just like, we can cut that corner, but we saw what happened. I mean, even when you're a big company. So it's very, very valuable when those things happen. I listened to it. I can't, maybe Courtney will have more input. She's wired. It's not a wireless mic. It doesn't cut out. What it really feels like is some kind of gate. It doesn't feel like she was losing signal. It felt like it was, because it's not cutting out. It's like dipping and then coming back up again. And it felt like there was some gate in the mixer that was doing something. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but from what you're describing, it sounds like it was something on the mix panel that was an issue.
Yeah.
But the way to ensure against accidents like this happening is A, do what they did. Don't use a wireless device on a live show. Make sure, or if you are going to have to use wireless devices, make sure everything's coordinated through the wireless coordinator, and make sure the batteries are fresh right before the show starts. Brand new battery goes in always.
But this was a rarely standard dynamic mic with with a wire, but it sounded dipping. And those can be really dangerous because you just can't figure out, in 2 minutes, you can't figure out what is in the mixer. And the dipping sometimes is caused by other mics, like the audience mics or something, like they could have had audience mics that are there that you won't be able to know what it sounds like until there's an audience there, until the stadium's there, you can test everything. But those live things there are, and you know that there's an engineer bouncing around through, like hitting all the, and I can just imagine what's happening there is there's a mixer and all the little things are going as they're trying to figure out what's going on and where hidden somewhere in a digital board, why it's there.
It could be some sort of echo cancellation that got mixed back.
Yep.
In the wrong
That's what it looked like. Some kind of the I just looked at it on YouTube. There's like a little clip and it just looks like it would look like a processing issue, not a connection issue.
Craig?
Oops. Having not seen the clip, but having been in a situation where somebody else on a show that I was working on decided to throw in a plug-in, a dynamics compressor, on a channel between sound check and the show. Like Alex said, when you're dealing with a system that's just a console that's that complex and has that much processing power, and it was a Digico. When you've got a 30-second to even 2-minute worth of clip, you have very little chance of finding if there's something that's been added in the chain, that you didn't put in. And it's maddening because, like Alex said, you're scrolling through all the various options trying to find out where it is. And in that situation, it could have been on the input, it could have been on a subgroup, it could have been only on one of the output feeds that's going to the broadcast. The engineer might not have even heard it immediately. So there's so many places where that could happen. So my main thing is once you get a sound check done, don't change anything and don't let anybody else change anything on your console.
And that is the most important thing is not changing anything after your rehearsal.
Good reminder. Thank you, Craig. And just a reminder to you, the viewers and our producers, to go ahead and vote on those questions. We've got a lot of them and we are getting close to the top of the hour. Next question, Bill.
Next one comes to us from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. He says, please provide some rapid fire tips for YouTube search engine optimization.
Jeffrey.
I got a lot of them. First of all, learn about playlists. A lot of people don't use the playlist the proper way, and take that playlist, fill it in with as much information as you can. And I even do some hashtags inside the playlist. That's a great way to go from do the what's called the YouTube skipping from video going into the playlist. Check the other videos in there, and then of course once you get into that playlist, it started. You can just sit there and just watch from there. Hashtags in all of the descriptions. Only do at least 3. But no more than 15. If you do 15 hashtags or more than 15 hashtags, YouTube actually will start to not strike you, but they'll start to downplay your video. Condition your tags to what people search, and this is in the regular tag area. So, like for instance, if somebody's saying, "How do I become a videographer?" Think about how you would actually ask the search term, and then create the not the tags, but the those tags, not the hashtags, but regular tags from that. So how to video, just try and keep it short, 2 to 3 words. And then don't put in variants of tags. So don't say videographer and then the next tag, how to be a videographer. And then, cause you'll actually be downgraded on that as well. And then start using stories. We talked about this a couple weeks ago and I started looking into this. Stories really can let you add more content to the video and allow more people to see what's going on. So, and they'll find it if they don't find it in your video, they'll find it in the story.
Thanks. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Chirag Cheetah in Dallas, and he says one of our video editors has said that Riverside.fm frame rates of 24 and 30 frames do not work, and only the enterprise account has professional frame rates that will work for editing and playback for a live stream. Any thoughts on that?
Alex.
If I can understand 24 not working, for whatever reason, but if 30 frames, I'm curious what frame rates they're actually using. Like, is it 25? Is it 50? It actually, the idea that you wouldn't support 30 frames a second makes me wonder about the entire infrastructure of Riverside. So either way, if you're able to get something close to 30 and you're going to do a 30 delivery, conform everything. Like, no matter what you get, people do this thing where they drag everything in with every frame rate into their project, and you should not do that ever. Like, when you're going to go into a project and you're going to do an edit, have an extra thing, you're going to push it all into compressor or media encoder or whatever, and it's all going to come out the same format, and then you're going to edit it. And if you promote everything that you get that way, so many things start to work better. Your edit works faster, your replays work faster, everything. You don't crash on render. Not that I'm bitter.
Memories.
Bad ones.
Bill?
Yeah, everything Alex said. Once upon a time, the world was lovely because broadcast was all there was that was important, and you knew what the frame rate was, the cadence was there, you knew your vertical interval and everything else. When digital came in, it provided so much more flexibility for so many things, but one thing it divorced you from was a lot of standards. And right now, particularly in people who are trying to get streams down to the lowest bit rates that they can, frame rate is one of the things that can float a bit, and that's ugly for something. So what Alex said, take whatever video comes in from whoever it comes in from and conform it, which is the process of transcoding it from whatever crazy frame process they used into something that is rock solid. A lot of us just go to like ProRes 422 or something that everything on the planet understands. It's a fixed frame rate and all the audio is understood and everything is kind of like most of the world takes that file and says, I know exactly what it is. I know exactly how to play it back, and I'm not going to give any trouble. And that's why we go through the conform process to get various things into one fixed timing.
Next question.
Next one comes from Vincent Alvarez in Bellingham, Washington. He said, yesterday's AFC Halftime show had commentators on a temp stage on the field. Someone failed to realize that there would be a concert at the same time. For the entire 8 minutes, we only heard the concert. What do you think it was like in the control room?
Nigel.
So I don't know what it was like in the control room. I do know what it was like on Twitter, and there was a lot of schadenfreude going on. My question is, to someone who's smarter than me that will probably follow me, is why didn't they cut away? Why did they stick with it for 8 minutes when it was clearly unintelligible?
Alex.
Because they didn't have anywhere to go. Like, there's nowhere, like they just have to eat it because there was nowhere to go. It sounded like there's a lot of communication issues about audio for that show. That probably means that they were not using crews. This is what happens. You get into a championship game, you're not using the crew that does it every week. And you mixed and matched crews, usually because you want to make it bigger and better. So you bring in the best crew for this thing and the best crew for that thing, and they're not talking to each other. And I bet you both of those things are connected. What happened at the beginning and what happened in the middle were probably miscommunication between two different crews, that just, and that's why you don't want to change things if you don't have to.
Grant.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of the left hand not talking to the right hand. And the communication just not being clear. It's also an example of cascading problems. So if it was as simple as they had another couple of commentators that were up in a booth somewhere that they could have just cut to, or they had other options, they didn't have any of that clearly, and they had no system to make it work. So the audio's having problems, and now the talent's having problems, and now they haven't, right? And it just is a cascading problems, and all of that is fixed by having good preparation before, and the communication about the whole thing.
I spend more time dealing with emergency plans for rehearsals than I do the actual rehearsal on most shows. Is what will we do if this falls apart? We'll practice that over and over and over again to make sure that we do it. And the quote that we say often is, when did Noah build the ark? Before the rain.
Next question.
Harshit in Central Florida is up next. He says, what is Noise Assist, and do other products offer similar solutions?
Mitchell?
Noise Assist is built by Sound Devices, which makes the MixPre, which involves the Noise Assist. It's a magical way of cutting out background noise, fans, and things of that nature. Normally, like a 6 will be good on it, but it truly is a magical noise assistant processor that can be built into the mix pre.
Alex?
Yeah, and the other one is Cedar. So those are the two big ones for hardware noise reduction. Cedar is the $4,000 per stereo channel for the hardware, but you can get plugins that are oddly enough $300, the same price as Noise Assist. So that dropped from $1,000 to $300 when Noise Assist came out and at that price.
Next question.
Ike Potter is up next in Hanover, Germany, and he says, audio, lighting, and video of office hours panelists are always great, but there seems to be a variety of how close or zoomed in or out each one is. Are there efforts to improve this?
Mitchell?
Yes. In Office Hours 2.0, it's very special that you've got to have the framing correct, top to head, side to side, because we're going to start using super sources, and when you start slicing everybody up, the eye line should be the same across them. So we are doing that. We're using our frame from Fenwick to allow us to check that out before we do our broadcast.
I just looked over at the 2.0 and we were like all lined up. So thanks for that reminder, Alex.
Yeah, the Fenwick frame is what we've been using. And I think that for some reason, we didn't show the stream today in Zoom. Usually we do. And that what usually happens before the show is you see a Fenwick frame and we're trying to get everybody to kind of sit inside of it. We haven't been streaming for a couple of weeks. And I think that as a result, we've all gotten a little lazy. So we're going to keep on pulling back to fill the Fenwick frame because that helps us get everybody lined up.
Yes. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, IMAX President Megan Collegan said, the turnout for Get Back shows the power of coming together in a theater, even though it's on Disney+. Would adding a social component to conventional streamed content create a similar togetherness?
Grant?
Yeah, I think you only have to go to a Star Wars premiere to in any theater. It doesn't have to be in a special cinema. In Australia, we often have them at midnight, on a Thursday night, or technically Friday morning, when there's these premieres of these big movies, and particularly Star Wars, because everyone dresses up, and now you've got a full theater. And when the opening title music plays, it's just electric in that room, and they're watching pre-recorded content. Well, what's that about? There is something about people being in that space together. And so now, as we heard before about these live events that are now happening in theaters, there is something that there's even more reason to be connected with other people in a smaller environment. You don't have to have thousands, and it's more locally accessible, but you're still getting this sense of togetherness, and are connected to the world as well, a bigger world. I think there's just win-wins all around.
Good point. Alex?
Yeah, I think at some point we can merge the two, where you have people at home, people in a theater, all of them feeling like they're part of the same community. And a lot of stuff that we've done have looked like those things. I think that the big thing is syncing the content, in these OTTs. So, and I think Apple is the right group to do that, because that means every app on the Apple TV would be able to sync, and every phone and everything else. The synced playback is part of what makes this work. And the fundamental thing that's missing is, Apple has this you can talk to 32 people, but I'm talking about hundreds or thousands of people should be able to watch a show at the same time. That is not hard. And I feel like that must be, it's not hard technically. I feel like that there must be pushback from ISPs that don't want to get slammed, for exactly the same bits at the same time, because there's no other reason not to turn it on. So I feel like there must be a logistical problem, because the technical is not difficult.
Next question.
Noah Sargent, Fullerton, California. Up next, he says, Alex, how did you add your logo to cables?
Basic labeler. We haven't used even anything specific. It's just a little white label that goes on with the logo printed on it. But then we put shrink wrap or shrink covering on it. So you put when you're building the cables, you put it in and you put that little label on, and then you shrink that on top to protect it, and then you have it.
Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer of Viera, Florida says, why choose Zoom ISO over Zoom Bridge? And he has a link there.
Grant?
Because Andy and Jonathan are awesome. That's why we choose it. Now, no, but seriously, Zoom Bridge is on PC. And so, yes, there is an advantage there that Zoom ISO is only on Mac at the moment. But of course, the other massive reason to choose Zoom ISO is that Zoom now owns it. And so it's only going to get better and better and fast, much faster than third-party services.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I checked out both of them, and the other thing is that the Bridge also has a Linux component to it. So if you want to go into Linux and use it that way, you can. The only downfall that I saw on there was that it only does up to 720p video. So if you get the magical 1080p or better, you won't be able to get that. Some people might not care about that part, but there are some definite advantages for using the Zoom Bridge over using Zoom ISO. But I'm using Zoom ISO myself.
Nice. Next question.
Harshit in Central Florida says, what types of lighting does the panel recommend for a lower budget? Would there be one recommendation that works very well to add some lighting for meetings and or make it acceptable for something like the panel?
Tobias?
Doesn't work at night, but the best and cheapest solution if you have a good window is to set up with the good window shining the light on you.
Natural light. Noah?
Yeah, it's pretty good to make sure that you don't have a bright source behind you, so that your subject yourself is brighter than your background. But I do have some examples of lights that I've purchased before. This is a dual panel, or 2-pack, I guess you can call it, of these light panels. The nice thing about a light panel is that it's kind of spread out, right? A little larger of a source versus like a single light source like that comes directly from something. I also currently have this Amaran 60D, and it's incredibly bright. So I only have it at like 5%, and then I use a Dome Mini 2 to help kind of soften that and spread the light out. Because basically, if you have a smaller source, it's going to be harsher light, right? And so you're going to see harsher shadows and greater contrast. Whereas if you have a source that's larger, that diffusion is going to help soften up the light and be better on your skin, generally speaking.
Mitchell?
The larger the light, the better. But if you're going small and you're going low on your budget, the good old LumiCube broadcaster works great. It's about $100. And then, of course, Elgato's got the key light, which works also very well.
Next question.
Next one comes from Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany, and he says, if I want to embed a Zoom meeting participant into a Keynote presentation, I have to grab the signal via Zoom ISO, via a Duolink-Card, via an Atem, and via USB into the Mac, right? What happens if that person shares his screen?
Alex?
I think the best, easiest way to do that is actually, you can use Zoom ISO, but the other option is to use something like a Zoom Room and then do 2 outputs from the Zoom Room, because you can define them and say, I want the presentation to come out of this window. I want any slide shares go out of this window. The person goes out of this window. So you have 2 separate ones going into it. Now you have both of them at any point in time.
Stefan?
Yeah, that sounds good.
And that's a 2 HDMI outs from your computer. It's not anything special, and it can be PC, Mac. We use PCs for that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question.
Hausmuck, our friend in Cape Town, South Africa, is in with the next question. Grant is here. Can he provide more details on my previous question on reports in Zoom? Reports for meeting versus reports for webinar, pre-event setup requirements, degrees of granular info provided in reports.
Grant?
Yeah, we should take this. We'll take it offline, Hashmik. I want to check. One of the things to check is that when you go to a business account, past the pro account, then you get the admin dashboard, which is a little different. And so I haven't been in the pro, and I'm not sure where you're at. I haven't been in the pro for a long time, and I can't remember the reports that you get. What I know is in the business and the dashboard, that you can drill down and get exports of the meeting after it's happened, even during it, and you get a CSV export, and it gives you a whole bunch of columns, 20 or so columns, that'll say when someone joined, when they left, and depending on their system, will give you version numbers of Zoom and their connection type and a whole bunch of things. But we should line up a time in after hours, and we can have a chat.
Sounds like a plan. Next question.
Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany, and everybody's heart's going to sink when I finish this. I did my first whole day event with Keynote using video media embedded via an Atem, worked perfectly until 5 seconds before the start.
Oh no, Stefan.
Yes. Well, everything turned out fine to get the end of the story at first. So what happened was I had to change the presentation a couple of seconds ahead of the start point. And when I hit play again in Keynote, all the embedded screens went black. So I tried to figure out what it was. And in the end, I had to take the Atem, who delivered the signal via USB, off the net. So I had to unpower it, repower it again, and boom, everything worked until the end of the day. It was just perfect for everybody. Yeah.
Glad that worked out, Alex.
One thing that when you're using the video that I discovered, I don't have enough, I'm trying to set it up, but I can't quite get it right in time. But there is a projector mode in monitors on your monitor settings for color correction. And what you can do there is color correct the output of your computer so that it looks correct on your switcher. We had this problem where the blacks look crushed when we were going out of Keynote, and it's like it's hidden. It was because someone was asking about frame rates. Photo Joseph was asking about frame rates, and so I was looking for frame rates, and what I found was that projector setting. I was like, oh my goodness! So now you can change your black levels and everything else, but not for the whole thing, just for the screen out to your computer, so that you can embed with the video and it doesn't look highly contrasty. So anyway, just something to little tip there. We'll talk about it on some Saturday morning.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we are now at the top of the hour where we're going to get into our discussion on digital events. What are we expecting? What are we seeing? Trends? And we will start with the open discussion. I'll go to you, Alex.
Yeah, and for anybody else who wants to talk, this is the place to raise your hand. Like, don't leave it to me. Anyway, I just jumped in there because no one else had raised their hand against it. So, I think that one of the things that I've been really thinking about related to this is how easy it is right now with a little bit of effort to really stand out. People are still 2 years into this. They're still using the vanilla system, and they're not really properly staffing it, and they're not really, those types of things. And when you put in a little bit of extra effort and a couple extra people, it starts to look way different. And what we're seeing over and over and over again is people seeing multipliers of how big their events are, their revenue, everything, going up, anywhere from 300% to 20 times as many people are showing up, for these events, and they're showing up regularly, but it's only the people who are investing in the experience of the user that is way beyond this turning it on and having people show up. You want to think about turning it on, having people show up, like renting a hotel room and running the AV yourself. Like that. And people do that, like salespeople, and they'll go in and they'll rent the room and they bring all their little things in and they do all this stuff. And it's schlocky. I think that's the technical term for it. Then it feels small and it feels stupid, and they're, but they're there to talk about their whatever it is. But that's just turning it on and running it yourself. That is the equivalent, is renting a hotel room and running everything yourself. And now you hear feedback from the mic and you hear all this other stuff. And what happens is people over time, they figure out, oh, I should probably have someone greet people with a table in the front, and I should hire someone to manage my AV, and I should hire someone to handle those things, and I should build those, and those become bigger. And before you know it, you have a custom stage built by World Stage, and so that's what the big guys, the big folks do. And you don't have to do that all at once. But I think that what we're not seeing is people do a lot of that in digital, and it's damaging our entire industry when people do bad, because then they go, oh, well, that's just an online webinar, event. It's not going to be very good. And I think that there is, when you make it great, people come back, and what we are, and it's super easy. It's still easy, remarkably, to separate yourself from everybody else doing online events. And people are coming back over and over and over again for these events. And there's a really growing demand because you're not cutting out 99.99999% of your audience. And so you only have to be half as efficient, and you can still get a much larger audience.
Yeah, you make a really good point because we're going into like this is year 2 of
Mhm.
where we are, and just whether the shifts happen or not, but just taking that extra time,
Well, when,
just thinking through that. Yeah.
and we tell people it's not going to be as expensive as most of these are not going to be as expensive as a physical event, but think 50 to 75%. Like you take that budget that you had for a physical event and give me 50 to 75%, and no one is going to go back. Like no one. Give me 75% of your physical event budget, and I can create an event that no one will ever want to go back to a physical event again. And because if you put that kind of people and infrastructure in Blue, I'm sure we'll talk about this. If you put real people and real, event planners into it, and you give them a half or 75% of the budget, they'll crush it, on a digital platform.
Sky?
And yesterday, my Sunday morning meeting, the comment was made, as we go into year 3 of this existence. And that was the acknowledgement that the world has changed, but it was also a recognition of, I don't think it's still an adaptation that we want to stay in this existence, but I think it's okay, maybe we should do something about it. And what comes to mind is, and as I remember the way the story that I understand, the Manet, the Monet, the Seurat, as a way of telling art, were not invited into the big salon in Paris. And so they just said, okay. And then they created their own event outside of the mainstream art that was popular at the time. And consequently, they became their own thing. So as an early adopter, I've always, had a pager and the big Motorola brick cell phone. And I've had the technology using the connective goal, but whatever the current technology was, on the bleeding edge. And that's where it's intriguing to me that I get to participate with Madeline Smithberg, because we are trying to find our audience, just like that Monets and the Seurats and things like that, but also having the history lesson from Graham Kerr, who was at the beginning of television, and putting that up against the motif of Casey Neistat and him finding his audience. So I don't know what that learning from history has, but those are thoughts about what is the future look like. It may be like nothing else other than humans connecting with humans.
Yeah, digitally. Blue?
Yeah, this is an awesome conversation, because I feel like right now every single client call that I have is in some way, should we be going back to in-person events? And my answer constantly is no, please, no. Why would you do that? You have, to Alex's point, you have access to so many more people. We have really globalized live events, whereas before they really were local. You had some people who would fly internationally, but when we host a live event now, we have people from all over the world be maybe not half the audience, but definitely significantly more than it used to be. And in so many ways, I think, I think digital events are kind of the democratization of live events. It's a lot easier to do. It's accessible to a lot more of us. Now that does have its downsides, right? I mean, because it's easier and it's accessible to a lot more, there's also a lot more crud out there. But I think the more people like us continue to make virtual events or digital events look amazing, the more people will come to us and say, hey, how'd you do that? Right? The more things like the Beatles happen. And, the more things like these big global events take place, the better. Because people will slowly realize it's not, should I go back to in-person events? It's, should I do both? Maybe. Depends on your use case. But definitely don't go back.
Yeah, that look and feel amazing too, because that's a lot of the argument. You get like the hallway conversations and things like that. But when we can build those elements in, yes, to your point, Blue, you don't have to go back.
Yeah.
Jeffrey.
I feel like I'm going to completely go the opposite way here, because basically what I used to do before COVID was I would go and I'd do live streams of small parts of larger events, or small events for that matter. So like, for instance, coffee talks. getting an executive in and a whole bunch of bloggers in, and then they ask questions, and then the executive gives some answers and things like that. That's the type of stuff that I always concentrate on. We also had a business where we went into their business and we did one-on-one interviews with all the employees, because they had a new product out and we were showing the product, things like that. My goal, my focus right now is to actually go back to what we were doing in, I don't want to say hybrid. This is kind of, because we were still live streaming out to people, and we were still having the event happen on YouTube, but we were there at the location doing that. So my focus is to actually take the equipment that in the last year and a half that we've seen come in, from the Mac Mini M1s to the Zoom ISOs and all that other stuff, and how can I take that new technology and put it into a box that I could put into a Pelican case and travel halfway across the country, set up at a location, and give the people that don't want to do the travel the opportunity to have an experience from there. And so that's where my focus is, and of course keeping it under a certain weight limit, because I don't want to have to carry like 15, 20 Pelican cases like Alex usually does in a lot of his productions.
You make a really good point there too, of like, I'm also watching the chat with everyone, and Leland had said, live streaming has been here, but to Eddie Scott, that it just accelerated. And while you were doing that and bringing the online world into the event, there's still it's the reverse going on. So it's just interesting to see and hear that. Courtney?
Yeah, a lot of people forget that live streaming of a live event has been around for decades, since the early 70s, when the cable TV introduced pay-per-view, where they could scramble the signal and you'd have to pay to unscramble it. And that was a one-way communication device where you could choose to participate in that live event. It was live. It went out to everybody at the same time. Usually it was boxing matches, or sometimes there were concerts, but mostly that type of entertainment. Now that we're in the digital world and the internet, it can be two-way conversations, and that's a lot more unique. And that is what it was said has been democratizing the situation. The fact that almost every laptop, computer, and phone has a camera built in for these video two-way communications. And of course, the advent of Zoom that allows us to aggregate multiple people into a single conversation, which used to be much more difficult to do in the past, even in the early days of the internet. I see the thing that needs to happen now is the increase in quality of the video and audio, something that we've done here. I watched a meeting of the SMPTE. It was a combination meeting between the AES and the SMPTE. If you saw it last Wednesday, it was such a train wreck. And these are professional people in video and visual effects. And just every single person, you couldn't hear them. They were off mic. They were poorly lit. There was distortion. They were muted. Every problem you could think of in a Zoom conference happened in that meeting. And they could certainly learn from what we do here.
Well, that to your point of how you show up. So coming into the meeting, I'm just going to a meeting, versus no, this is now, there's a certain standard that has been set by many people. Grant?
Yeah, Courtney, I think the sad thing is talking about the future of online events. Unfortunately, that is a little bit of the future of online events, is people still doing them badly, right? But I think that there's obviously something that happens big when we talk about global, and the potential of reaching, it's scaling to be global. I think that's where it's obvious that there isn't a central place for everyone to gather, but actually it can be bigger than the biggest venue in the world. That's the potential. But what I've been excited about as well is when local, smaller events that have had to turn online, and they've really been reluctant to do it because they have only ever known that event to be in person and in those four walls. And I've been fortunate enough to walk through always speaking up the potential of what this could be. And I think of one particular event with just a couple of hundred people that were very kind of against it, but they wanted to do their best. And when you could see light bulbs going off in their heads as they were experiencing things that they wasn't possible, that they could never do in person. And they're the type of things that I think about when we're not restricted by time and space. What do we do with that without that restriction? And I give you an example of that, and that is, I talk about the parking lot talk. Like so many of our online events, we finish them and then we fade to black and then we kill it. Now, I think if we're not restricted by time and space, why are we doing that? There's an opportunity actually to open, particularly in Zoom, open a bunch of breakout rooms, name them whatever, and let people just hang out. It's very, very easy. There's very little overhead to just letting people talk and have their parking lot talk as they would have in person. Whether that goes for a few hours, that's fine. And just have a few people scheduled to let them talk through. And they can meet different people and, hey, can we jump into breakout room 12 and have a little chat about this? Yeah, great. And you still have some discussion going on in the main room. And it just kind of is an amazing way that people are connecting. And I think that's one of the big differences from live streams to what we're doing with these new online events, that Zoom has enabled us to do this on such a large scale, but still we're connecting like this. So when I'm looking at the 15 people that I can see right now, we're interacting and I'm watching and I'm seeing people, look away, and some people that are, nodding and whatever, right? You don't have that with live streams. And you don't have it when we're all just sitting in a room facing the same direction. We're all facing each other. You can't do that in a room.
Yeah. Nigel.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. First of all, I think you need to always understand the objective of the event. Partly because don't force a digital event where it's not needed, but partly because you may be able to explain how a digital event could increase the value of the objectives of that session. But I would tell you the other thing is, and I think the thing that lots of people, particularly in larger companies, are struggling with, the true benefit of what's been demonstrated here doesn't exist in one budget. It often exists in multiple budgets in different places. Mm-hmm. So you've got the events team that would go to the CD or the CES or show. You've got the education team that lives somewhere else. You may have the sales enablement team that lives somewhere else. And so you may find that the answer of the value actually exists across multiple budgets. So the challenge there is you've got to get high enough up the organization without annoying your client to see where the total of that budget is, because the way that often it's described here, rather than spending $5 million on a CES stand, for $2.5 million, you could build a studio and broadcast every day. That's true, but that may exist across multiple different owners in a large company.
That's a good look into just the corporate activities and behind the scenes. Stefan?
Yeah, I think we will have a divided market in the future. We will have digital events, and we will have events in person. We always try to push the quality of the digital events right now, because we don't want to annoy our audience, and there are so many bad digital experiences right now. We have to be on the top notch of them. This is one thing. I'm a facilitator, and I usually work with large groups in a certain room, and there are really good reasons to keep going and do that again, because I think certain processes are really not good to transfer in the digital world. The side effect of our digital event I was talking about a couple of minutes ago was we started with 145 participants. Until the end of the day, we only lost 20 of them. If this would be a real life event, I guess a third of them would have left the building until noon. So there is definitely some advantage to good made digital events.
Good point. Bill?
So I've been ruminating since Dan Tepfer's thing the other day, because he just really sparkled off the screen, and I thought, boy, this guy should be a star. He should be out there everywhere. We should all have known who he was before he showed up, but we didn't. And I asked myself why, and I was reminded of a Sting documentary, Bring on the Night, where they talked about one of his tour where he was touring with some of the finest jazz musicians in the world, and somebody mentions in that, one of the backstage kind of, I guess, admin guys says, well, the reason is because you put anybody in the band's name on the marquee, and a certain number of people show up. You put Sting's name on the marquee, and you sell it out in 10 minutes. And it's a process of, when I said sell it out, I realized most of the time when things really blow up, there is a component in the back end. And I saw this a lot in radio, where on Friday, it would drive me crazy. I was a production director of a pretty big radio station. And Friday, the sales guys would all jump in and throw copy on there. And I got mad at them because I would have to work all weekend to knock out all the spots they had done. And there was a certain feeling that you guys are just taking people to lunch all day and you're not working that hard. And I'm doing all the work here on the back end, but you're making all the money. And I resented it for a little while, but then I grew up and I realized, because the station production director, great guy, told me, yeah, Bill, and you're great, you're fabulous, but they're critical. If they don't do their job, if they don't make the relationships and they don't close the sales and bring in the money, everything that everybody else is doing just really doesn't matter. And in one area, we'd like this all to be just artistic and great and for us all to blow up and have success and the rest of that. But the sales component of this, finding a way to get sustainable money rolling through a system, is really what does bring these artists to prominence and everything else. Dan Tepfer is probably as talented as some of the pianists that we know of from the road and that have great record sales and the rest of that. The difference is he hasn't somehow put himself in that box to create that stream that makes him bigger than just his talent should allow him to be. And I'm concerned about that as we go through, that we keep building these things that are great and fabulous, but we're not really competing in the world of, can you compete in terms of getting attention that turns into economic power that you can use to get more attention.
And that's why we have these conversations on Mondays where we bring the business and marketing and all the production world together. Just seemed like a fitting place to plug that. Tobias?
I think there's an inherent problem that we're fighting against, which is that we are in the 1% of use cases for Zoom. So we're always going to be fighting against the natural branding of how people engage Zoom. So Zoom's reputation for most people is it's a staff meeting. At best, it's a staff lounge. And so people aren't going to, it's very hard to counter that and say, come to this Zoom, it's an event. Like I still don't think of the great webinars or YouTube content I go to online as an event in the same way that I would be excited and looking forward to going to a theater for something in person. So even though I'm getting so much value from many online events, they still don't carry the same weight in anticipation, and so I think that's a challenge to get over that reputation hurdle.
You make a really good point there, Blue.
Yeah. So I actually had another thought, but seeing as I'm going after that comment, I'll just say this. One of the things that I would say is those of us that are marketing large Zoom events and doing it effectively, you'll actually never hear us say Zoom in our marketing, ever. And beyond that, we actually go so far as to say, this isn't just a Zoom meeting. And then, of course, we put everybody into a Zoom meeting. So, I think it's really about positioning and about making sure that the audience has a certain expectation for the outcome and then delivering on that outcome. So generally speaking, I'll just say that, Tobias, although I really appreciate the comment. The other thing I want to just talk about is what I really quickly, what I think, because I think this was supposed to be 15 minutes and we're at 25. So, I think the biggest threat to digital events, at least the ones that we're talking about, are a combination of two things. One, hybrid, two, live stream. Both of those things, first off, hybrid, it's just, we all know how hard it is to run one event at the same time. Running two events at the same time to two completely different audiences, having completely different experiences is like, please don't do that. And then, live stream, just a one-way experience. Virtual events or digital events that were live streams didn't work before the pandemic. Why would we think that they're going to work now if we go back to doing one-way broadcasts? These interactive communication and these interactive experiences like the one that we're having right now, this amazing conversation, that doesn't happen on live stream. And I think there's a place for live stream, don't get me wrong, but in terms of live events, yeah, I think it's a huge threat to digital events.
Alex?
Yeah, two things came up just listening to everyone, all the great comments. One is, like Blue, we try to make it nothing look like you're watching a live event, but we're rebranding the whole thing. Like we're wrapping it, putting in all the other stuff into it. That's why we bring all the ISOs out, is so that you're not just in a Zoom event. And even if you're in a webinar, you're getting a fully produced show that comes out of our switcher that goes into the webinar. Like it doesn't, it's not, we're not really trying to manipulate the Zoom thing. You're getting a fully, with graphics and all the other bits and pieces. The second thing is, I was really thinking about what Jeffrey was talking about of wanting to go back. And I realized, the best part of NAB and CES are showstoppers and CES Unveiled and all these things that don't require you to run all of those places. And I think that there's an opportunity to have physical events be much more expensive and much more exclusive. People can still give tickets away, but it is something that, it's $1,000, or instead of $25 a seat, it's $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 a person, which will, and then of course vendors are giving away, but it's a much more precious thing of what they give away so that you can come for free or you can come at a discount or whatever, so that they can bring in the people that they want to have those dinners with. They can have those things, but you're not trying to there's no events. It's all virtual. It's really about them just being able to mix and do things that you really want to be in the same room for. And there's studios that you can broadcast from to everyone else. And so, we do this all the time. We've built them for a lot of different companies where there's a studio available to the press. There's a studios available to the press, radio studios available to the press, those types of things that people are able to talk about their product to the rest of the world. So I think you could build a physical event. It's a hybrid event. It's a physical event, but it's a very exclusive and nothing streamed for the people who are there. And then there's lots of places that you could broadcast to the rest of the world. So you're not trying to mix and match the two. You're giving the things that are important in both of those. And I think that might solve some of what Jeffrey's trying to do and actually probably end up generating as much revenue.
And to round this out, just some of the things that we're thinking about, I'm constantly thinking about whether us producing or actually as a user is the user experience. Like there's still a lot of friction that happens, especially if you're dealing with people who are tech averse. And like there was this one event, and I tweeted about it because I was just so disgusted that it was, you register on Eventbrite, then you go in, you get it, it says go to this for the event. So, okay, cool, you go. Then you've got to download the app because they had it outside of like trying a new app. And then once you download the app, you've got to go through all this registration process like that. That's what I would like to see. And what I think people who, I know we're talking a lot about more so the production side, but this is part of the entire experience of how your attendees get in and out of events. So I think that's one of those areas that'll make or break it for a lot of people, and really thinking and being intentional in how your attendee experiences the event. So let's get into the first question.
The first question comes into us from Aaron Giancarlo in Flagstaff, Arizona. He says, can the panelists share their best practices for digital events?
Nigel?
Yeah, so my best practice for digital events, I don't have the technical skills that everyone else here is, but the earliest on you can in the planning, get it registered that there will be rehearsals and run-throughs. That you need to make sure that the executives, the people you're working with, their assistants, have the time in the calendar to do the run-through, do the rehearsals. The technical boundary is actually very high for a lot of fairly technical people at fairly technical companies. And if they don't rehearse, it's not going to work.
Alex?
So much of what we do is just coming from physical events, like what we did before. It's really, it's basic ball handling skills. Exactly what Nigel was talking about. It's rehearsal, it's preparation, it's planning, It's, having people have to be there on time and be ahead of things and giving lots of communication. And, those are the best practices are, and giving yourself 2 or 3 times as much time as you think you need to, and fighting for that time and being able to say no to things that are going to endanger the event. And those are all things that we did in the physical events, and we're just bringing them into the virtual ones.
Grant?
Yeah, there's lots of different ideas that I have, but one of the things that we have found just works amazingly well is Tech Check, we called it, which is like the registration desk of an event, and that's where we're checking everybody's tech setup, all the attendees, before they get into the main meeting, and we're normally doing that 2 days before the event, and so people can show up anytime. And they come through into a separate Zoom meeting. We may have 10 different Zoom meetings. And so they're mostly having kind of this one-on-one or a small group of people that they're connecting with. And the reason we did it at the start was mostly about getting people, making sure that they could hear and see, and we could hear and see them, so we know that it's going to work when they go into breakout rooms. But the reason that we continue to do it, as people are used to that now, the reason we continue to do it is it's a human connection of a digital event before it's even started, and they're meeting other people. It's as Alex is saying, it's the what we've always done with events. People standing in a registration line turn around and talk to each other. Where are you from? Why are you here? Yada yada. And suddenly they've just made a connection that continues throughout the event and post-event. And we're finding the same thing happens with Tech Check in those rooms, is that people are connecting with us, they're finding out, they've got those questions, whatever they have before the event's even started, and they're meeting other people, and they're making Facebook groups of people that were in this Tech Check room, and they're journeying through the event. It's the human interaction. It's very simple to do, and it works very, very well.
Tobias?
I think if you're claiming that your event is interactive, you need to prove it in the first 90 seconds or 30 seconds. Otherwise, people's brains switch to I'm at a presentation. So whether that's just throwing the ball around the presenters who are on different Zoom accounts, or actually doing something else, raise your hands. If just something interactive in the first 30 seconds to prove that there's an engagement here.
Stefan?
Yeah, my point is about planning and preparation. I use a tool called Session Lab to prepare for the event and to add all the blocks and details and stuff like this. And when we do the rehearsal, I divide the team into two parties. One party is the technical team, the support staff, and so on, and the others are the contributors, or you would say the talents. And I go through the whole thing point for point, but from 2 different perspectives. If you put them together in one team and run through the whole thing, one on the other or the other side kind of gets bored and loses track. And so dividing the team and doing separate rehearsals is one thing.
Okay. Next question.
Aaron Giancarlo is right back from Flagstaff, Arizona with our next highest rated question. And he says, are your clients getting better about being online, or are they still resisting digital events?
Good one. Alex?
We still see people who are, I have to admit, if someone, we're so busy at this point that if someone resists the digital event, we just say, okay, when we move on to somebody else. You just have to remember that, I would not worry. There's so much work out there right now. People looking for it. It's just a matter of finding people who are interested in it. But the main thing is that I think that there are people, you're going to have teams that are just very addicted to, what they used to do. But the big thing that we keep on talking about is how much of the world you're not getting to. Your addressable market is much larger than your local market. And it's just you just got to keep thinking about that.
Sky?
The phrase familiarity breeds contempt. And I think the comments that you've been hearing from other people around the world is that we're getting so used to doing a thing badly, we don't know how bad it is. So to that point, I'm thinking if Brooks Brothers would actually take on the presentation, it might be, hey, we don't know if your content's going to be any good, but you're going to look good. And I just have a feeling that attitude, maybe we should just charge more for preparations for executives, then they would participate better. I don't know.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. I'm writing a letter to the editor to counter New York Times opinion piece from yesterday, why churches should drop their online services. What would be your top counter arguments?
Alex?
For a church, your addressable market is the world. And so giving up 99.999999% of it is incredibly stupid. Like I don't know how to say it any other nicer way. Like, what are you thinking? Like, like that, that's what I would tell them. like whoever wrote that is an idiot. Like, so that's what I would tell them. I probably would be nicer about it and point out that you're not addressing and there are so many houses of worship that are literally doubling, tripling, multiples of 10, growing their market. When they do an online, when they're not doing hybrid, when they're building it for the online audience. And what's really working is houses of worship doing a digital initiative and leaving their physical initiative the way it is. When people want to come to a physical thing, they can go to it, but they're not trying to stream those services. If they do someone with that minister or that rabbi or a monk, they're doing it for the physical event, and then they're doing another one for the digital event. And when they separate those two out, they're incredibly successful. When they stream the service, they're not successful. Like that is not a successful mix. It's a hybrid event, and it does not work because it puts everyone online in the back end. But it is, I know a lot of houses of worship. My wife works at one that are going to, within the next couple of years, they will be making more money online than they ever made. I don't know about hers, but I'm saying other houses of worship, they're going to make way more money in donations online than they ever did in person, and it's just going to keep on scaling. And there's going to eventually be online churches. So you're basically going to seed there's going to be houses of worship that are only online, and that's coming. It's already starting to happen, but in 10 years, the biggest churches in the world, the biggest congregations in the world, not the biggest religions, will be online. They will not be in person.
I was going to say that we are seeing that happen already. Grant?
Yeah, I think that the churches have had a challenge in general since the internet has come around, and actually so much information is available. The best sermons are available online. The best music is available online, and so they've actually had a challenge of competing with that when people were just going down to the local church. And the reason I say all of this is because I think that the interaction of that community, it used to be that the church was the social network of the world, right? That's where you heard breaking news, and that's how you connected. And if you didn't go to church, you weren't connected to the world. Well, now it's very different. And so I think that the place is online for that, and that it has to be interactive. And that is where the common unity is found, is that people are interacting with each other. They're not just consuming content. And so when they get that right and they do these digital events online that are interactive, then it explodes. And that's how community is built.
Sky?
Yeah, Tobias, please don't bite at the journalist that's poking at the conflict, because he's doing his job in stirring up the pot. And at least it's stated that this is his opinion and it's not news. And that's the other issue is, again, you say the word church often is seen as a structure or a facility. As you and I know, it's the community, and it's the thing. And to that point, even Bill Jr., the executive of Ford, at the stockholder meeting said, if Ford thinks it is a automobile manufacturing, it will die. It needs to understand that it is in the transportation industry. And as you note, they did not have an issue. They did not take loans in 2008 like many of the other automobile manufacturers did. So consequently, it's an attitudinal thing. And I guess the last thing I would offer you would be the term Luddite. If you're not familiar with that term, look it up, because it's people that were in great change during the weaving era, and they would break things apart and be very adamant because they're I believe the Chinese phrase is their rice bowl was being threatened. And so consequently, how do we not take the bait, but respond with what is the future of humanity, and how do we stay connected as communities?
Yeah, that's the human part is actually what I was going to touch on, because I think of my parents who are wouldn't want me to say their age, so I'll just say 70 plus, but they're, the ability for them to even get to the house of worship anymore is challenging. So even though COVID has accelerated the fact that many houses of worship are online, that enables them to still participate. Leadership still calls to check on them. They call their friends, just that community aspect. And now they've even found the house of worship or the church my mom used to go to in Jamaica. So she could not physically go and have relive those memories and connect with her community there if they were not online. So just the human aspect of community. So just giving you some stuff to work with, Tobias. Next question.
Next one comes from someone named Liberty White. Liberty from Atlanta, Georgia. For events that traditionally incorporate tipping or donations, what are some of the best solutions that you've seen or used?
Courtney.
Well, probably the most common is Patreon, which is a special website set up, if you don't know what it is, for video creators, musicians, visual artists can set up an account there, and their fans or the people that want to subscribe to their YouTube channel can go there and pledge a certain amount, $5 a month, $2 a month, whatever they want to set up. And you can set up different levels of participation on Patreon so that you have different types of users. So, bigger, deeper pocket people can get more services and more customized delivery, access to private screenings or private performances and so on. That and GoFundMe, I think, are the two most popular online means of getting money out of your fans or viewers.
Tobias?
For donations during a live stream, if you just kind of use OBS or something to flash your Venmo up, that's good. But keep in mind where your audience is, because we were doing a live stream that was hitting a lot of Europeans, and I think they don't use Venmo, so we had to have some other tool for that. And another side is sometimes you don't really want to be soliciting tips for yourself, but you might link in whatever you're doing to some fundraiser or some charity, and just keep linking back to that.
Jeffrey.
It's important to remember that this is actually a little bit different than actually getting a tip or a donation from a physical event, and some states have some regulation on it. Before COVID, there were a lot of websites out there trying to figure out how musicians can get online and do their streaming and get tips and donations. A company called Street Jelly came out, and they basically went on a token system. So basically what you would do is you would buy so many tokens, and then you would tip the performers with tokens rather than with actual cash, which is some way of circumventing. I'm not sure of all the legalese on it, but the bigger thing is that tip jar. And we talked about this right before the show. The tip jar is something that's usually, if it's in line of sight, it becomes something that people feel the need, the obligation to do so. So when they're behind a screen, that makes that a lot tougher to do. So what I would probably do is turn that into the more of the PBS model of trying to get your donations and things like that and putting them into packages. So at the $25 level, you'll get a mug and a t-shirt or something like that, and give them something physical to bring back, so at least they have something for the events. And that's where NFTs are really going to start to play into that, because then you'll be able to give them tokens and t-shirts and things like that for their tips and donations.
And Alex?
Yeah, before it became TikTok, Musical.ly was really good at that, where people would dump money in, dump tokens onto folks when they were part of that. I think the other thing is just a really well-designed Stripe input in a WordPress that's around what you're doing, around what they're watching, and make sure that it's always available and inserted into it. And that can work really well. It just needs to be present all the time, so they don't have to go somewhere else to do it.
Right. Next question.
Aaron Giancarlo is back from Flagstaff. What does the panelist see as the new challenges moving forward with digital events?
Alex?
I think that some of the big challenges are, how do people network? And that's the dinners, that's the get together. I mean, we're doing that with after hours. We do a lot of that, but a single event, that's a big challenge, is figuring out how do you create that human connection? And I think that that's still something that a lot of people probably struggle with more than anything else. And then, of course, interaction with the audience.
Nigel?
Yeah, I think for me, the real issue is, sorry, it just completely left my mind. I had a really good thought, but I was listening to Alex.
No worries. Grant?
I think that there is the challenge of people's blinders about digital events, that you can't possibly do certain things. And so it's only until they start to experience them that they get to do it. And I agree with Alex about social, because often people, to be honest, there's these conferences that people have that kind of, it's an excuse to come and be able to go to the bar afterwards, right? Like actually it's to connect with people, or it's to go and play golf. Some of the surgeons that I do events here, they're going to a golf resort, and they're doing some sort of education program, but half the day is spent on the golf course. And so that's a real challenge for talking, well, how do you do it? And we're trying to talk about it, making it about content, and actually sure, the content's great, but actually it's about that connection that they're having. And so it's finding ways that they can do social events. And so we have seen people doing cocktail making and live DJs and yoga and magicians and whatever, things that are super interactive and fun, and getting people out of the idea of that they're just sitting in a room at their home, but they are interacting and having fun.
Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is up next. He says, being that many countries are eager to reopen their borders to stimulate their economies, would this affect digital-first events for the long haul?
Alex?
There's lots of, it's going to affect the countries more than it's going to affect digital events. Digital events at this point, we've turned the corner. They're the future. Like, this is going to be the big game. And it doesn't mean that you can't have physical events. It just means that there's a whole different set of skills, and there's a whole bunch of other things. And there's a lot of things that countries can do to bring people in for tourism, but it's probably not going to be physical events as we keep moving forward, because the digital events make global events way easier to do and way more scalable.
Jeffrey?
So before COVID, I'd be going to South Korea. I went there several times in a year because they were big on startups. They were big on bringing in technology so they can show it off there. And when I was at CES this last January, I went to one of their pavilions, and I found out that they went from the specific group went from a $35 million a year cash flow down to 1.2 million, and they're very, very eager to bring the ability to get people back into the country and do that from there. We've been in talks about actually me going there and doing digital first events from there to kind of stimulate things going, but they're still trying to find their footing. They're still trying to find where they're going to go with that thing, and that's the unknown factor. And then of course when you bring in a language barrier, that makes it a little bit harder for sure.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. He says, for those of us without a great chat question system like Mukana, what can we do to build portals that encourage this level of interactivity?
Alex?
Slido is a really good one, kind of in between to use. I think a lot of people seem to like it. Mukana is becoming more and more available, so you can also contact me. It depends. It's still a little bit of a budget to set it up, but but we are slowly rolling it out piece by piece. So especially for folks that are in this group that are doing something that's kind of more of a nonprofit type of thing, you should definitely contact me. But we are looking at rolling it out in pieces, especially if you have a new market that we're interested in, because we'll be making it much more widely available in the summer, and we're in kind of a beta mode now. So it's being used every day outside of this. So,
Brittany?
Yes, outside, if you don't have contacts with Alex to get Mukana, another thing that Leo Laporte's been using for years is IRC, International Relay Chat. You can set up a IRC room. You can have moderators in there to moderate it, to keep the trolls out. And you can incorporate it into a live broadcast like he does. He always keeps a chat room open. He doesn't have live participation of the chat room, but people can ask questions there. They can comment on the live show that they're seeing. And at one point, due to some situations behind the scenes, he threatened to take all of his shows offline and not do them live, produce them, and then just air them as streaming on the network. And that was quickly shut down because the participation of the chat room, everyone said, well, they weren't going to watch it anymore, because if they couldn't comment on it live and participate in that live interaction that happens in that IRC room, that it wasn't even worth watching the shows. So he quickly changed his tune and went back to doing them live again.
Nice. Blue?
Yeah, so first off, love Slido. I also really love Makana, but at the same time, one of the things that we try to do with all of our events, which I know Alex and I differ on a couple of things, and this is one of them, is we really encourage live participation from the audience and actually taking questions, right? So when it comes time for people to ask questions, I don't use the raise hand feature. We don't use the chat. We actually just look for people who are sitting there with their hand up. And it's a little dangerous, right? Because you never know what you're going to get. But it also mirrors the in-person experience. When people walk up to a microphone and ask a question, you never know what you're going to get. And I really like that. Beyond that, we worked to create a dashboard or a portal that allows attendees to submit questions as well. Just something with a form-based system can work. You don't have to use Slido. It doesn't have to be as complex as Makana. I guess you could use Zoom chat, but I wouldn't because that just moves too fast. So just a couple things to think about.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jasmine Lee in Singapore, and Jasmine says, has anyone encountered an event which had digital-only sessions accompanied by in-person networking activities and or meals? How would that be as the experience from an attendee and production point of view?
Sky?
Well, we do exactly that with the Mad in the Kitchen virtual event experience, and corporations and organizations will hire us to cook together. And we found that around 30 people in the kitchen experience is a really nice number. And the consistent is, I didn't know I could do that, because they're getting the opportunity of doing a thing in their space and they're being encouraged. But again, our whole motto is, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And we're making a fun and delicious experience. And so that we're doing it in full production mode, though, on our end, on a Zoom platform, that has a lot to do with the expectation. But everybody's mic's open, we're having a great time, and they've said they like it, and we're doing a lot of repeat business.
Grant?
Yeah, this is a funny one where it's like a hybrid, and it's somewhere in between a full digital event and a hybrid. It's kind of somewhere in between, and which is an interesting thing, because we often get people saying, oh, we want to do hubs all around. And so we're going to do a hub in all the capital cities, and people are just going to come together, and some people are going to present from that room, and then other people, and it bounces from city to city. It's so complex to do that. To do it well, it's so complex. It just audio only, like thinking about how you do the audio, going from an open room to another open room to another open room, all this open space, and how you handle audio. As soon as you make that a digital event, and now it's just a screen and it's just going out, it's much easier. And then the interaction can happen on a second screen, a second device. Then that works really well too. What I would throw out there around this idea, and this was about those social ideas too, is that we've done an event recently where it was totally online. People were at home, and then we just simply organized meetups at night in the different cities that were around. It was as simple as that. We just said, here's the bar or the restaurant, and just register that you're going to show up there. And so it was the best combination. They did all of the content was done at home really effectively, engaging with each other, and then the day finished and they went off to a restaurant and they saw a bunch of people that were from the same event. It's an amazing way of doing it.
Nice. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California, here on the panel. Imagine a world where the virtual events and meetings are the industry standard. What are the benefits and reasons for an in-person meeting?
Nigel?
It might be networking. It might be more than that. I'm thinking about I am flying to Vegas to be at the rocket launch with Mr. Predo because I want to be around a bunch of people who are doing something that's fun. And I want that shared experience. I'm taking a bunch of people to Mexico for qualifying for a sales conference. I mean, I think there are specific events and specific reasons why people are going to want to be in the room. And that personal to personal recommendation will be one of them.
Jeffrey.
Most hands-on events. If there's something that you need to touch, you need to configure, you need to work on, that they cannot send to you, and you cannot do it over a one-on-one call or anything like that. Especially vehicles, I know they have things like Carvana where you can get your car and you can drive it for 7 days and send it back. But in some cases, you need to go and converge into one place because there's going to be one car, one prototype, and you want to get the information that you need so you can send it back and let people know if this is something that you want to work with, you want to move forward with.
Alex?
There's a lot of really high level, big money meetings that are just best done over dinner, or in a quiet room. It's not something you want recorded. It's not something that you want to hash things out. So I think that those are key there. And then there's also just, again, a lot of the things that I think are going to make sense in the physical world are going to be, whale conventions, whales being people who have a lot of money that are going to spend it. There's in-person events that most of these companies do that every person represents $1 billion of revenue or $100 million of revenue or whatever. You're still going to have the events for them, that are in person. It's just that the retail version of the events probably doesn't make sense.
Tobias?
I think just as enabling virtual was a big accessibility add-on, probably if things were only virtual, there'd be accessibility issues of different learning styles and different ages and different types of people that really benefit from in-person. So you'd want to still be able to serve them.
Next question.
Next one comes from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California, and he says, how can we incorporate crowd noise and other atmospheric elements?
Blue?
Yeah, so this is a big challenge that we still continue to have. Some of the bigger clients that we have some pre-recordings of, from in-person events that they are pulling and actually just, mixing into the program feed. It's kind of like a laugh track for a sitcom. I don't necessarily love that, but it does make the experience at home just a little bit more believable. It just, you have to be careful with it. We've had extensive conversations with Zoom about trying to get them to have some kind of unmute all where it can be specifically for audience reactions, where, the primary speaker is is live and everybody else is just ducked at like 20%. But we're such a fringe, generally speaking, that, I don't know that that'll ever happen, but, fingers crossed.
I would so use that, Jeffrey.
I think the NFL got away with it simply because of the fact that everybody wanted to be in the stands, and it was basically a crowd noise to begin with that they recorded, and they just happened to be able to use it again. I highly suggest not to even think about doing too much of it, because some people can really get turned off on it. Now, the only other thing that I'll say that might be a counter to that is if there was a way to actually have people get the option to turn on and off it, like a setting. So I don't want to hear the crowd. If I'm virtual, I don't want to hear the crowd noise because it might affect my speaker system and it might just muddle what people are saying or anything like that. But if I could turn that off and just listen to what the speaker says and not have that extra sound, I might be for that.
Right. Bill?
Well, as someone who makes a lot of content and has a lot of stuff that goes both on broadcast and the web, this drives me crazy because the human voice occupies a certain range of frequencies. Generally speaking, women's voices are a little bit higher, but a crowd is a group of voices. So you're trying to mix a voice, typically the content carrier's presentation, with added information in exactly the same frequency spectrum and managing the levels of those two things so that you do not interfere with the intelligibility of the main presenter is the big deal. Now, if it's a good presenter and they speak articulately and clearly and they're well mic'd and you've got a lot of signal to noise ratio in their chain, then you can probably push them over the top of a generalized crowd noise, which the NFL and other sports things do all the time. But if you get a presenter who's not professional and they are a little bit mumbly, or they don't have clear S's and F's and the fricatives and stuff like that, and then you mix crowd underneath that, you're just going to drop their intelligibility substantially, and your audience is going, what'd they say? Wait, I missed the end of that. And that's the worst thing in the world. So for me, this is a last resort. If you must do it, it needs to be done very delicately, but I try 99 out of 100 times not to put myself in that position.
Next question.
Next question comes up from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. Anyone aware of examples of traditional broadcasters, for example, news, ESPN, Netflix, and so forth, embracing Zoom for behind-the-scenes Q&A or any sort of community making around their content?
Sky?
I believe we witnessed it at the last Summer Olympics. We saw some of that, at least some kind of video interaction with the audience somewhere remotely located and then being beamed into the broadcast. But I'm also starting to see big video walls of faces on a lot of talk shows. And so they'll have a live audience, but they'll also have an interactive. Now, whether those are real live humans or they're just a pre-recorded experience, again, it's television for the sake of entertainment. I don't know.
Courtney?
Well, news in the way of town hall meetings or something have incorporated a lot of Zoom events in to bring people into a town hall where there's two-way communication between their audience and the panelist. Also, the other place you see it, you mentioned Netflix in that, almost this time of year during awards season, all the producers, all the major studios, Netflix and all that, send out invitations to panel discussions of the various directors and actors in certain movies to get you to come to that movie or view it online if you're a voting member of any of the people that vote on those awards. So you'll get invitations, and they'll have live communications. They'll have a panelist of maybe the top 3 actors and the director. We'll have a panel discussion, and you'll be able to not necessarily be on a video panel, but you'll be able to ask questions of these via a chat room or something, which they will pose to the individual panelists on the panel. And it's a way of generating information, finding out information about a movie before you vote on it.
Alex?
I think the closest thing that I've seen from a traditional broadcaster is the Manning brothers doing their thing on Monday Night Football, where they have more interaction with the audience. They bring people in over Zoom. They're doing more things that are a little bit more aggressive, and I think that's a place that they're experimenting. So that's one good example.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine down in Panama has our next question. How would you recommend to create an interactive event if it's done on the webinar style?
Grant?
So I would encourage you to consider that you're not talking to many people at once. You're talking to one person, and so it's a lot more like radio than like TV. And when you do that, it changes the way that you interact and it pulls people in. And so in doing that right at the start, have interaction so that you're reading the chat, constantly reading the chat and reading it out and saying, that's a great comment from Alex. That's a really good point, Blue. Here's a good question. And so, and even right at the start, that pre-show that you could do, you could just say, where are people coming from? I know it's done all the time, but it works. When you say, oh, look, Alex is in California. It's great to have you here. And then, oh, look, we've got this person from this country. And wow, what's the weather like there? I know that just seems trivial, but it really pulls people in when they hear their name and they hear other people's names. And then it goes into content and you're constantly reading from the chat and referencing that. People know that it's being read, and so it gets that engagement going more and more, and you don't have to rely on video. Now that's kind of a live stream with chat, and so I think that we can do better than that. But if you are limited to just that webinar, then that's your only form of feedback, then get it and use it as much as you can.
Yeah, people want to be seen and recognized. Alex?
It's all about the conversation. I mean, we've been doing this 600 and some times without any format other than like there's a little one-liner of this is what we're going to talk about and look at this conversation. We've got lots of people watching. We've got people interacting. We've got people, like there. And so get the content to them ahead of time. Like just move it over there. Don't, if you're going to talk more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes most, we went a little longer today, but like that's the outer edge. Like a half an hour of not interacting with folks is the outer edge for us, and it just doesn't work, in my opinion, any longer than that. You want to be talking to people the whole time.
Jeffrey?
My favorite thing is some of these virtual conferences that I've been going to. They've been sending swag. They've been sending, coupons for like Grubhub and things like that, so we can have lunch together and stuff like that. And what I'd really like to see is actually doing a way to break the system, or as in breaks for the people, instead of this constant stream of webinar, event after event after event. So like, for instance, if you did swag, let's say you gave a t-shirt, you have blue t-shirts and red t-shirts and yellow t-shirts. And then anybody that's in a yellow t-shirt becomes part of group A, group B, group C. And then there's a sense of community, smaller communities within a larger community. And that way you can also say, okay, all the yellow shirts will be in this at this meeting at this time, and then the blue shirts will be at this time, the red shirts will be at this time. That way, you get a small break in a conference, and then you're still bringing out the same content for each group, but you're doing it for smaller bites rather than one big chunk.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Noah Sargent here in the panel from Fullerton, California. Do you see theater, live sports, and concerts outliers for digital first? Will there continue to have in-person audiences for these types of events?
Jeffrey?
Yes and no. The biggest thing about any type of event, whether it be a sports event or a big concert or something like that, is there's a lot of hands in that pot. You're not only the people that own the venue, but also the city might have some hands in that pot because they want to bring those events in there because they're more important. People might get tax breaks and all that other stuff. So that becomes a big factor. And then of course you have the people that just want to go out and feel like they're in some sort of normalcy again. So I don't think that's going to change. People are still going to go to events. We've seen it happen. That's why I went to CES. It's going to be an interesting way on how we do it, but there's going to definitely be some events that you'll end up going to.
Alex?
When we think of digital first events, we want to think about the fact that it's not necessarily there won't be any physical congregation. It just doesn't. We just don't know whether that is going to be something where the hosts are in the same place as the people. So that's the thing that I think that we want to keep thinking about is putting a screen up and letting people see stuff, whether that's a concert or whether that's a corporate event or a theater or whatever, and then giving people feedback. I mean, you see with Tony Robbins and you see with the stuff they're doing in Monterey, getting to see people creates that energy that you want for the folks that are there, but they don't necessarily have to be in the same room, and every person gets a great seat. They get to see it really up there. They're not way off in the distance. They're not crooking. I mean, I haven't been to any of Tony Robbins stuff in person other than some stuff in corporate, but you're always kind of like looking somewhere, trying to figure out who's talking and where they're talking from and trying to find the screen to look at. And instead they have front row seat all the time.
So true. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back up with Zoom made a strategic investment in American Express global business travel. Do you think that's a recognition of the hybrid world we're in?
Courtney?
Well, yes and no. I think it also maybe their plans are to set up a separate portal on that site to do virtual business meetings. So as an alternative, you can either go to Global Business Travel and schedule your travel and manage all your travel for your business meetings, or you can use, their Zoom to set up a virtual meeting in lieu of the Global Business Travel, or perhaps a hybrid. But I think it's going to be an additional way of luring people into Zoom for business meetings.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jesse Productions in the San Francisco Bay Area. Are the pre or after event breakout rooms that you all do facilitated, monitored, or not? Let's say that there is only one main breakout for networking.
Alex?
We always facilitate them, mostly and monitor them. Mostly that has to do for us, that has to do with the quality of the experience, not as much we're worried about something happening, but when we want to make sure that there's somebody to answer a question if something's going wrong, or someone that can come back to us and let us know someone's having trouble. So now we don't do really, really fine, small breakout rooms. We're doing, hundreds of people at a time. So,
Blue?
I'll agree, generally speaking, with what Alex said and not provide any more value at this time.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama is up next. He says, how can you make the House of Worship live stream more engaging and interactive? Any suggestions?
Alex?
Yeah, I think that one of the big things is interaction. You know that was coming. So interaction is the thing, that figuring out a way to have people feel like they can talk about whatever was just discussed. Like there can still be a talk that starts the session, but then there is how do we how do you ask questions and interact with the person that just said something, and you can do it at a huge scale with Q&A.
Chris?
I would agree. Rewind about 5 minutes, listen to everything that Grant said about engaging people in the chat. I mean, everything he said, I was like, yeah, I was going to say that. I was going to say that. Yeah. I mean, it's little things. There is a North Carolina church called Elevation, and they do an amazing broadcast. Almost always sounds wonderful. It's cut like crazy. They do such a good job. And their pastor, Stephen Furtick, the guy is always talking to people, and he's asking for people to respond to things in the chat. I mean, think of like, your Southern Baptist preacher, like, can I get an amen? He's like, can I get an amen in the chat? I mean, it's, and it's amazing. People, and you watch the chat and people are engaged. They may not have interaction, but they're totally engaged. So that's half of the question, engagement versus, but really, I'd like to hear what Grant has to say.
I was just going to add one very specific suggestion, and that is prayer requests. I've seen it work at the end of services, just to come on live like this, and for people to type in their prayer requests. It's really simple, and then you have a minister who prays for them, and it's amazing.
Very good call. Next question.
Chris Fenwick says, he's poking the bear here. I was wondering if Blue would be willing to share the most awkward or embarrassing thing that came up while taking a question live from someone raising their hand.
Blue.
Yeah. So first off, I'll say this. Generally speaking, people are super polite and what you would expect, right? It's kind of like when you think about live events, it's not like every event there's some crazy who asks a question. We generally speaking don't have this. I think the most awkward thing that we had, and this probably won't come as a massive surprise, but was a COVID related question. And, we were asking questions. The opportunity was for people to ask questions about the content, and, our stages have multiple people on them. You have an MC introduce a speaker, and what happens is the person gives them a high five or they give them a hug, and then the next person comes up on stage. And the question was, how are you guys dealing with COVID as it relates to a lot of people being really close together and unmasked? And it doesn't matter your opinion, but this is a terribly polarizing question. Right? Because it doesn't matter your answer. Half the people in the audience disagree with you. And that was probably the most, because we were all in the back going, how are they going to answer that one? The person answered it honestly, and exactly what you would expect happened. Half the people loved them and half the people hated them. And that was unfortunate.
Alex.
That's why I don't like open mics. sorry. Like the thing is that I find that they're out of 10 questions, one will be unbelievable tearjerker on the open mic. One will be incredibly awkward and embarrassing, and 8 of them will just be boring. And so and I think that that's the biggest problem is people the reason that we don't do it on virtual events is not because it's virtual, it's because I ran hundreds and hundreds of physical events and grew to just hate the mic answers. Like I just, in fact, the original version of the precursor to Mukana was actually designed to eliminate the mics in a physical room, which we did. And I believe, if I'm correct, I was told this, I haven't been to a lot of World Bank meetings. It was a World Bank meeting that we built it for. Within a year, they almost never use mics in the room. like it just disappeared. They didn't use our system, but they were like, oh, I'm done with the mics, and because it was the meeting went so much faster because people would have to type it instead of droning on for 3 pages. They would just type the question, because that's why we put a limit in how many letters you can use. You have to figure out how to get it into about the size of a tweet, and it just keeps the whole thing going. I know that for like ones where we're talking about our life and everything else, some of that doesn't make sense. And there's definitely seminars that I've done that way, but anyway, so that's the, and I just feel like when it's coming informational, it's not about how we feel. It's really about, what do you think? I just find that it's so much better, even in a physical world, to just get the questions, have the audience vote on the questions, have them decide what we all want to listen to, not what that person wants to listen to for the next 10 minutes. Anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go
ahead. Yeah, please do. This is a great way to close it up.
I know, right? Just 2 people disagreeing. Okay. So
on open mics.
You're right. On open mics. Exactly. So I'll add this.
The irony.
Yeah, I know, right? You really, you have to be good to be able to take questions live, right? Just a mediocre speaker who doesn't know how to interact, who just knows how to present, like, don't let them take questions live. But somebody who knows how to interact and how to just have decent conversation, and also they should be prepped, right? If this happens, do this. If that happens, do this. Here's how you move along. Also, from a crew perspective, once the question is asked, mute the microphone, right? I shouldn't have my microphone unmuted right now because I already, provided my answer, and unfortunately now Alex is listening to me speak. But from a crew perspective, that's really important. So let them ask the question, but then mute them. And then if the speaker wants to go back to them, they can. Whereas if you just leave the person unmuted, I've seen that happen too. As the host is giving, or as the speaker is giving their answer, the other person's like, yeah, but. It's like, shh.
Well, and we don't even let them hold the mic. Like we put a mic out, and literally the width of our people seated were so that our mic runners could lean in and do it comfortably. So it's 3 people, by the way. So it's 6 wide is usually where we put channels, because that way the mic runners could do that, and they could always reach in, but they would never. The one thing we just told them is never let them touch the mic. Like they're going to grab onto that mic, you pull it away. Like they're not allowed to touch the mic, and because that way we could always pull it away if they came off the rails. And it was, anyway, it was just it's a funny thing that, because I trained mic runners, because I did literally thousands of hours of this, that I'm so like, oh, let's not. That was like the first thing we did with the question system, was to get rid of the mics. so anyway, it's and we have a group of people here that are talking, and it's, but I think that I do think it's anyway. I probably went too far for a broadcast, but I really don't like them. So anyway, that's it.
There we have it, the end of our show. Thank you all for your questions. Thank you, panelists, for those great answers, open mic answers. And I'll hand it back to you, Alex.
And great. It's so great to be a panelist as best I can. Sometimes I forget that I'm a panelist. But Liberty, you're doing such a great job. Like just really, really great. It's so great to have you doing this every Monday. It's so great for me. I think it's great for everybody. Your energy is just amazing, and you're just doing it's better every single week. So thanks so much. Yeah, it's really, and I think I think we were talking about it in the panel view. I think this might be something we do every month, like just talk about events. We're all working on them, and we just keep whatever's coming up and channeling it. So, all right. And now we're going to jump into after hours.